My name is Madeline and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to talk about all of the books I read in the month of August. It is a very gloomy, cloudy, rainy day here, so it's the perfect time to talk about some books. I had a fairly decent reading month in August. Quite a bit of books, I think 9 or so, either 3 or 4 star reads, so pretty good. I read a little bit out of my comfort zone, a lot of fantasy and some genres that I typically don't read a lot of, so that was also kind of interesting. But without further ado, let's just jump into the books. My notes here so I can remember kind of what I read and what my thoughts were on it. So first up, I read on my Kindle, Susan Settles Down by Molly Clavering. This was a really sweet book that is set in Scotland. A brother and sister, and the brother inherited a home in Scotland, and so they decide to pack up their bags and move from London to this remote little village in Scotland. Loved all of the characters and the little town. Ended up giving this 4 stars. And that was mostly because in the beginning there was a lot of dialogue written in Scottish dialect, and I just found that that was a little bit hard and tedious to read, and so I ended up skipping kind of a lot of that. If you hear baby noises, she's downstairs with my husband having a snack, so that's what's going on. Hopefully not too much of that will come through. Next up was a reread, and that's Miss Benson's Beetle by Rachel Joyce. I read this for the first time a couple of years ago and remembered enjoying it. I wanted to see if it kind of held up to my memories. Honestly, I did not super enjoy it this time around. I gave it 3 stars. So we follow this woman, Miss Benson, who is traveling to New Caledonia. She wants to discover this golden beetle that is just a myth at the time. And I loved her character, her perseverance, her drive. She employs this other woman to be her assistant, who is like her complete opposite. And there's this friendship that kind of evolves. The setting, I liked New Caledonia and the descriptions of all of that. There's just a lot. The characters in this book all have a lot of trauma, and it's just becomes kind of repetitive. Like each person has this baggage and trauma that they're carrying around, and it felt like a lot. Like, I get it. That's what's happening. It just felt very repetitive to me. So unfortunately, I did not enjoy this as much as I imagined I would or thought I did the first time. I don't know if I will end up keeping the book or passing it along. We'll see, but that is Miss Benson's Beetle. Next up, I read a fantasy, and that is The Earth Treader by Alyssa Zavalianos, I believe is how you pronounce her name. This is a very Hobbit-esque quest fantasy. We follow Ryla, our main character, who has to go and find these gemstones to unite the kingdoms and have world peace, basically. And she has a talking cat companion called Moo, who accompanies her on her adventure, and she is able to basically use magic through harnessing the powers of nature. And so there's a lot of beautiful descriptions of the nature, which I really liked, and reminded me a lot of The Hobbit as well. I enjoyed this book. I especially liked towards the second half when there's a bit of a romance that unfolds, and yeah. Pacing of it, the beginning part felt a little slow to me, but this is also this author's debut novel. So keeping that in mind, I thought it was a really well done and fun kind of fantasy read. I am definitely wanting to read more of her works. I know she has a book that has some poetry and a middle grade, and I believe another kind of young adult fantasy novel. So if you haven't checked out her books, I would definitely recommend it. I read Loyally Luke by Pepper Basham. This is the 3rd book in the Skymar series. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but these are basically romantic comedies where our main characters in each of the 3 books are siblings, or sort of siblings. And this third book follows the only male character in the group, and that is Luke. And he is a carpenter. He goes to Skymar to do some renovation work and ends up spending a lot of time on this project with the princess, but he doesn't know she's a princess because she kind of keeps it on the down low while she's in this town. The female character, Ellie I think is her name, I enjoyed her perspective a lot more than Luke's. I found it kind of hard to relate to him. Overall liked it. Again, I think this was a book where the second half was stronger than the first half. And once I got into it, I found myself just wanting to keep reading and not wanting to put it down. There's a beautiful kind of redemption arc and second chance kind of story going along with it. And Pepper Basham includes in her books lots of like text messages and emails and kind of mixed media, which I always really enjoy in books as well. I read this one over the course of July and August actually, and that is Bird Poems by John Clare. This is a Victorian poet who wrote a lot of poetry just about the nature. This is a collection of, I think, all or most of his poems about birds. It's a really beautiful edition with lots of woodcut illustrations to go along with each of the birds, and I really enjoyed this. Certain poems that I enjoyed more than others, which is to be expected in a poetry collection. But what I found really interesting about this was just how detailed and scientific and accurate his poems were about all of these different species of birds. He wasn't very well educated or educated really at all, I believe, but he just had such a profound understanding of nature, and so yeah, I really enjoyed that about this, his poems, and there were a couple that I tabbed too. The next one is kind of hard for me to rate and to kind of think of my thoughts about, because I had such mixed feelings about this book, and that is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This is a super popular book, or at least it was when it first came out a year or two ago, I think. And this is basically a fantasy story that feels very realistic. It feels like it's kind of happening in our world, except there's these fantastical elements to it. There's this war between these gods, and there's some magical things that can happen in this world. But otherwise it feels very realistic. And our main characters are basically in this kind of you've got mail situation where they are exchanging letters through this magical typewriter. They don't know that it's each other. Well, one of them does, but the other doesn't know. And they're enemies because they are both going after this same job at the newspaper they work at. So all of that is kind of going on while we have this war kind of happening in the background. So I really liked the setting. I liked this You've Got Mail-esque kind of story. I loved the magical typewriters. I loved the letter writing that was included and getting to read their letters to each other. All of that was fabulous and I loved. What I didn't love was towards the end of it, we have some open door scenes. And there was some other kind of relationship stuff that I didn't particularly care for. It's such a hard book to rate because I feel like there was so much I really, really enjoyed, but then these aspects really pulled it down for me. I ended up giving it 3 stars, I think, which feels fair. It was such a disappointment for me because I was enjoying the book so much until we got to those points, and then it was just kind of like, ugh. So I don't know. I know there's a second book in the series. It's only a duology, I think. I don't know if I'm going to read it. I don't know if it's similar in those aspects to the first book. If you know, you'll have to let me know because I enjoyed a lot about the first book and would like to continue it if it doesn't have all of those same kind of things going on. The writing of it was also just so beautiful. There were so many passages that I just had to slow down and read again. So yeah, this was a very mixed kind of book for me to review. Next up was a middle grade, and that is the Mona Lisa Vanishes. I don't remember who the author is, but I'll pop up the book. This was a middle grade nonfiction all about how the Mona Lisa painting was stolen and kind of how it was recovered. It is written with so much humor. Even though it's a true story, it feels almost like fiction because it's so funny and feels so almost outlandish and crazy at times, like the way things happened and all of the kinds of crazy circumstances that had to align for things to unfold the way they did. This book reminded me a lot of another middle grade book called Bomb, which is all about how the atomic bomb was created. And in that one too, there are just so many kinds of like crazy coincidences that happened that allowed history to unfold the way it did. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. There's also some lovely illustrations in it, so I would definitely recommend like physically reading it, either ebook or the physical book, because the illustrations were so lovely. I had no idea the history of the Mona Lisa and how it became such an iconic work of art, so that was a lot of fun to read about as well. Fantasy, it was really the month of fantasy for me. This was a fairy tale retelling called Before Belle. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling that feels very reminiscent of the Disney Beauty and the Beast movie. A couple of twists. So our main female character, she was injured during a royal procession, and now she can't walk very well. She is has this disability that has really changed her life and put her on a different course. She had to stop dancing. Her kind of future just became really perilous. Our Beast character has these magical abilities that come with a cost, very reminiscent of the Disney movie. And there were parts of this that I enjoyed. There were parts of it that felt very slow moving. It definitely felt like it was the author's first book. I don't know if that is the case. But it was very moral. There was a lot of beautiful messaging in the story I did really enjoy. I ended up giving this 3 stars, so there's that. And then the final book I read this month was Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. I talk a lot about this in my recent reading vlog, so if you want to hear my more detailed thoughts, you can check that out. But overall, I enjoyed this. Thomas Hardy writes so beautifully and describes the setting so well. You feel really immersed in his story. I didn't really care for our main character, Bathsheba. In fact, she kind of infuriated me for most of the book. I had such a hard time reading her story at times. Gabriel, the character Gabriel, though, really kind of redeemed the story for me. I really enjoyed following him, and he was just such a lovely friend to Bathsheba, even though she didn't always deserve to have such a loyal friend, with the way she treated him and just other people in her life. To finish this because it was one of the books I wanted to read this summer, and I did a pretty good job reading most of the physical books that I wanted to read this summer, so I'm pretty proud of myself for that. And I'm glad to have this classic checked off my list. As you can see, I tabbed quite a few passages that I really liked. There were some really beautiful parts of this. It's not an all-time favorite, but I'm glad I've read a little bit more of Thomas Hardy. Right, so those are the books I read in the month of August. Pretty happy with it, and I am very excited for fall reading, autumnal reading. I've already been picking up some very cozy things. Looking forward to that. Let me know below what you read in August, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!